Hi, folks. You're on the Insecurity Project again with Jamin. My guest today is Filipa Bellette. She's an award-winning medical practitioner, founder of Chris and Philly Functional Medicine. As with all my guests, I'm super interested in not only the success that they've experienced, but how they got there, and in the process, what they've had to overcome, specifically in their internal journey. So, Filipa, thanks so much for being on the show today and being willing to unpack how you got to where you are. It's always such a gift to give someone to lift the lid and say it hasn't always been beer and Skittles, and that the process has often been difficult. But I think it gives people hope that if one person can do it, well, another person can do it. And if they can do it, well, then I can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. And so it just lifts the collective hope that it is possible to overcome stuff that has got in the way and limited you, and rise above to live a meaningful and fulfilling life, and an effective life, bringing contribution to the world, which is what you are doing. So thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited. I love your podcast. Listen to so many, so I'm feeling very privileged and honored to be here.
Oh, that's very nice. Let's begin in the beginning. Always interested by backstory. I think almost every client that I've ever worked with has had some kind of aversion to going back, and some hope that you don't need to go back. But going back is where it all happened. That's, so much of our life is shaped by the experiences we have when we're young, growing up in our families. And so that stuff fascinates me because it's how the map gets made. And once the map gets made, it very rarely gets changed. So I'm very interested in how the map was made. And then I'm always interested in how a person has found a way to enlarge their map and improve their map. So tell us about what it was like growing up in your world and the role your parents played in shaping your sense of self.
Yeah, so that was a really interesting question because I was thinking back, like I have fond, very great memories of growing up. So we lived in Tasmania in a country, outback country, bush, surrounded by not just my family, but extended family. My nan was up the road, my uncles and aunts were up the road. So we were always with our cousins, and we had a very tight family relationships. And my mum and dad were very loving, supportive, hard workers. I don't feel like, maybe I'll go into that in a seckie. So hard workers, my mum was very much and I can see myself in both mum and dad. So mum was very much, she was a night shift nurse at night, mum of five during the day. She kind of kept the household going as well as our finances, whereas my dad was the visionary. And so he was the entrepreneur, the businessman, without really knowing how to run a business, but he just, he was excited about something and he went out and did it. And so from that perspective, in terms of how it shaped my entrepreneurial journey, is that my dad instilled, and not that he ever said, I don't ever remember him sitting down and saying to me, Philly, you can do whatever you want to do, and this is what I've done. It was more just watching dad, and he'd be like, oh, I have a building project and I'm going to run off and do that. Oh, I want to build a flower farm. I've never seen anyone do that before, but now I'm going to do that. So he was very much like working in the trades, but always creating new ideas, even now in his 70s, mid 70s, late 70s. How old are you, Dad? I can't remember. He's got a new project. He's creating tiny homes and like pods. And I'm like, Dad, you don't have to do that anymore. But he just loves doing that. And so he was also a very creative person, loved to draw, but wasn't a very good drawer, he thought, in his eyes. But as a young girl, I loved drawing and dancing and writing and all those lovely arty type things. And he would always say to me, I remember, Philly, you're going to be on the next Dancing with the Stars or the next Australian Idol. And I'm like, I would roll my eyes at him. I'm like, no, I'm not that good. So he had a lot of belief in me, or even what someone can do, that, whatever you want to do, you can go out and do it. But as a child, I remember I was very shy, maybe even slightly anxious, and I don't know where that came from. I was a middle child, middle child syndrome, but I had two older sisters who were a bit older than me, and they were even a bit like mother role models to me, and I feel like they've shaped my life as well. So especially my older sister. very popular, outgoing, outspoken, kind of the complete opposite to what I was as a kid. And I was always trying to follow in her footsteps, and it showed up in like good ways now, but I would say like in my teenage years, 20s, there became a lot of dysfunctions in the way that I was trying to model that and trying to find my place in the world.
Mm. It's so interesting. As a few things to pick up from what you've shared already. The modeling from your dad and just the power of that. It's common for parents to tell their children that they can be successful and they can go and achieve, but for your dad to actually model that he was a person who didn't take limits, came up with new ideas, backed himself, and the confidence that instills, even if it doesn't happen immediately, that ultimately you know what's possible because you've seen it in the real world and you continue to watch it in the real world. The gift that gives you is profound. But then watching your sisters model their own version of confidence and success. So the process of seeing it happen with people doing it and then trying it on for yourself and finding your own version of it. And sometimes the clunkiness of that, of going, but I'm different from you and I can't do it quite like you do. So what does that mean about me? So tell us a little bit about, you mentioned some dysfunctional ways. Tell us a little bit about how your world started to not work well and you didn't feel like that you were emulating the success of your sisters or your parents, and getting stuck in life.
Yeah, so I would say, so in Tasmania, we have high school, which is grade 7 to 10, and then college is years 11 and 12. I think it's different to where in Victoria. Hey, are you in
I'm in New
Victoria?
South Wales.
New South Wales? New South Wales. I lived in New South Wales. So yeah, that's different.
Yeah,
High
yeah,
school is like 7 to 12.
yeah.
So, um, yeah, so in high school was fun. I again don't know how it happened. I came from a country school to a brand new school, and I was considered the popular girl. Even though I was shy and quite insecure in myself, and I clutched onto that, and I'm like, yeah, this is all going okay. And then moved to college, so years 11 and 12, and a lot of my friends dropped out of school. And so I was left without that security blanket, I guess, of having people that loved me and thought that I
Mm.
was cool. And so again, I was trying to sort of emulate my sister, my older sister Carly, who was a very good writer and very studious, but also very confident, lots of friends. And I didn't know how to make friends in college. I wasn't very good at doing that. And so I started getting good grades at school. Again, there were a few things that I was super passionate about. Writing was a big one, and I was starting to get, my teachers were like, "Wow, you're really talented. You're this, and this." And so I felt like I clutched onto that side of things in terms of, okay, well, if I can't be the popular person anymore, I can get appraisal from my teachers and, even my family and my sister and my parents because I'm getting straight A's. And so I kind of just obsessively started working at school and in my grades. And this continued right through university. So I did a Bachelor of Arts and then I went and did a PhD. And it was this obsession that I thought it was fine back then because I thought, oh, it's not a bad thing to want to get straight A's all the time and HDs. But looking back, I can see it was causing a lot of stress. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself. I had massive amounts of imposter syndrome that even when I would get these grades, I'm like, do I even deserve this? Am I like, how did I do this? Someone's going to find out at one point. Especially when I was doing my PhD. So I was young, 23, I think I was when I started my PhD, and that's pretty
Wow.
uncommon at university. And so I was constantly trying to compare myself to these mature women and men who were doing great things. And here I was writing and thinking one day they're going to find out. And then I became a tutor and a lecturer, and I'm like, holy crap, one day they're going to find out. And so I had so much imposter syndrome around that I worked 150% to try and deliver or put that output out of good quality work so that I wouldn't ever be found out. And I was passionate, like there was passion around what I was doing back then, but I felt like the dysfunction was that I needed to look good and I needed to get good grades, not because I wanted to make a big impact in the world, which is now I feel like when I work, that's my main purpose. Does that make sense?
It does. It does make sense, and such a common pattern. It's part of the insecurity is rocket fuel dilemma of the 20s, of our 20s. You know, it produces extraordinary performance, which you've described. Like, all right, cool. I'll attach my value to performance. Great. Well, then I better perform very well, and the more I perform, then the more I'll get loved. And so you went 150%, which it's an impossible number. Obviously, you only have 100%, but it is accurate in another way, because you're kind of stealing from future energy. It's not sustainable. You are digging into reserves that you don't actually have in order to perform in a way that gives you your best chance of being acknowledged, and eventually it comes crashing down. So
Yeah.
tell us about how that process ended for you. I mean, how did it ultimately cost you to run that strategy of driving so hard for so long?
Yeah, I love what you said about the future energy. I'm like, oh, I've never thought about that, because I guess, like, being in, the natural medicine field, is that I think about when you don't have that energy left, you start eating away at your insides. But it kind of is your future energy too, because it prevents what you can be and what you can become and what you can give. So for me, it was health 100%. So before having children, it was showing up in different ways, although it wasn't causing an issue with how I wanted to live my life. But weird stuff, like I started developing, it was diagnosed as vasovagal episodes, where when I was in a state of stress, I would faint and fit and then pee myself, and it would happen quite often. And it would take a day or two to recover, but once I was back, I'm like, yeah, keep going, keep doing. And it's what I definitely was an addicted doer. That's kind of like what I called myself, or even now it's a recovering addicted doer. And so that was one thing that was popping up. A lot of hormonal issues too. So, like, my periods stopped. I wasn't getting periods, maybe every 3 or 6 months it would come along. And then eventually, when we wanted to have children, there was infertility issues, which caused more stress. And so I feel like that was, from the physical side of things, it was definitely showing up there. And I'll get to then children, and then things really fell apart. But also too, like, relationship issues, even just being able to have fun. And this ties back, I forgot to mention too, back in my childhood, my dad's business adventures actually went bust at one point, and we were at the point of bankruptcy. I think I was 14 years old. We had to sell our beautiful childhood home that was my only home for the last 14 years. And I remember crying. I ran to my room that day on the day we had to move out, and bawling my eyes out, because at the time it was probably because I didn't want to leave, but I think too I was definitely being negatively affected by, like, the financial strains of our family. And so that also has played a part in my addictive doing as well, which kind of gets into the business story in a second. But why did I mention that? Where was I up to? Relationship issues. Oh yeah, relationship issues. So there was a lot of, and not being able to have fun. So I pulled myself into work and studying and working, and I didn't allow myself to have fun, like holidays. I'm like, holy moly, what? Chris and I always talk about it. I'm like, why weren't we going overseas all these years before we had children, when we had the freedom to do it? But it was because I didn't allow myself to do that. One, because of the work, but also because of financial insecurity. And it was like I had to, like, hoard my money. And I'm like, I can't do anything because I need to have this money in my bank for, I don't know, to buy a house or something. Now I look back, I'm like, there's always money. Money comes in and out. And why didn't I just have fun with that? And so then I had children, and my body, it was quite a beautiful pregnancy, but the birth was quite traumatic. So it was a 3-day labor, a very complicated, like, delivery, ended up having all the interventions, not a cesarean, but big forceps that tore up my bowel and my bladder, and vagina. And then after that, I had nerve issues where I couldn't pee for 4 months. I had no sensation to urinate, and so I had to use a catheter during that time. And the doctors put me on heaps of antibiotics to prevent UTIs, and I ended up going in and out of hospital. So that was a huge thing physically, but then many, many years of that emotional, psychological stress, which was burning out my body energy as well as my future energy, like you mentioned. Um, and then it was almost like that bucket just got too full. And once I had kids, that all just crumbled. And I got to the point where for 6 months after having Poppy, like I couldn't do anything. I had no creativity. It was all sapped from my body. Um, I think I continued working at university, but just casually because I really my tank was very empty. But it was showing up in very dysfunctional ways. I had no love for my child. In fact, I didn't really want her at that point. Lots of marriage relationship issues. And all of a sudden I went from this woman or this young woman who could achieve and do things, and like my worth was all about, what I could put out, to like I've delivered this child and I felt like, I see it differently now, but she's ripped me apart and she's ruined my body. And like now I'm just a mum and I don't even feel good about it. And so that was huge. Like that was huge from an identity point of view. Like, who even am I now? Like, and I thought that this dream of maybe even modeling the way that my mum was an amazing mum and looked after our 5 kids while working at the same time, to I don't even feel like cuddling my child. So where is this worth that people talk about, and this love that you feel for your child, and like how amazing motherhood is? I didn't feel that initially.
Vulnerable stuff. Thank you for sharing. And I'm sure lots of people can relate to this. So then keep going. What happened next?
Okay, so Poppy turned 1. So all of this, I wasn't addressing anything because I just thought people were like, even GPs, it's just normal to feel like this. And so I was struggling with like mental health issues. Probably I didn't tell people about that though. Like I said stuff like, I don't feel any love for my child, but I didn't want, again, it was maybe my insecurity of not wanting people to really know how broken I was feeling inside. And so mental health issues, I started developing like low immunity, catching all the colds and flus and infections. Like literally every 2 months I'd have something new. 2 weeks. Chronic back pain to the point where there were some days I was lying in bed for the whole day or two, not being able to move because my back pain was so bad. Gut issues, skin issues, hormonal issues, low libido, and even obsessive compulsive tendencies as well, which again caused a lot of issues with our marriage because I suddenly developed this like thought that my husband's cheating on me. Like I had to check every email and text message, and none of that was happening at all, but it was just my mind seeing the world in a completely dysfunctional way. And Poppy turned 1, and I thought at that time, I felt like an 80-year-old. I'm like, what's going to happen if I don't do anything about this? One, I'm probably going to lose my marriage. I'm going to cause dysfunctional issues with my children. And I don't know, maybe I won't be here in a few years' time. So I took matters into my own hand. And it's interesting listening to your podcast when you talk about health, that when people have health issues, they usually go and address their health issues as a health issue. And so initially I did that because I didn't know anything about root causes back then. And so I tried to heal my body by changing the way that I ate, which like all these things definitely helped. And it took inflammation of my body and it relieved some symptoms. So, I've started fermenting foods and, making my own yogurts and just going back to the basics rather than eating everything from a packet. And then and that got me to a point, and then I started seeking out help from physiotherapists, osteopaths, naturopaths, energy healers. Again, some of those treatments helped with some symptoms, but it wasn't getting to the root cause. And then my second baby came along, and I think she was about 3 months old. when I found functional medicine. And so functional medicine combines the natural therapies, natural medicine, with using scientific lab testing to actually diagnose what body systems were imbalanced. And that was something new that I hadn't thought of or tried. And so I started doing my own work on myself with my functional medicine mentor, who then later taught me how to practice functional medicine. And so initially I'm like, did all these amazing lab tests. I'm like, yeah, wow, my dopamine levels are low and I've got adrenal fatigue and I've got like parasites overgrowing. And I thought then, I'm like, yes, I've got to the root cause. And so I started doing work around those imbalances. So a lot of that involved nutraceutical supplements and, diet changes and lifestyle changes and all that sort of stuff. And again, I remember 2 months into my adrenal fatigue protocol, I was feeling better, but I still wasn't feeling optimal. And I remember talking to to Dr. Kalish, so he's the functional medicine practitioner. He's like, okay, you're doing this, this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, I'm taking those supplements, I'm doing this diet. And he's like, well, how are you living your life? I'm like, yeah, that hasn't changed. I was still running around trying to be and do and like 10 o'clock at night, have I done all the things on my checklist that I needed to do? And like, and I was feeling better too. So I dove back into my business and like my work output. And, I was saying yes to everyone and trying to do everything, not having any sort of strategy or any balance around that. And so he said to me, you do realize that that's probably like the root cause as to why you feel like this anyway. And so that was, looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, that's quite simple. But it was a huge light bulb moment for me, because all of a sudden I'm like, okay, yeah, so all this stuff that I'm doing to support my body physically is important, but I'm never going to overcome these symptoms that keep popping up in my life until I address the root cause, which is also why I really resonate with what you do with the Insecurity Project, because a lot of the things, like even clients that we work with, we're always asking why. It's like, okay, why are you feeling like that? Okay, you have this issue with your adrenals or, a pathogen overgrowth in your gut. But why did that happen? And it's like, well, it's because I eat lots of sugar. Well, that makes sense as to why you have a candida overgrowth. But then it's like, but why are you eating lots of sugar?
Yeah.
And, and then it like really does go back to the way that people think and feel about themselves, which then dictates their behavior, which creates a lifestyle, which can create a health issue.
It's amazing that you say that, because so often people stop at a few levels of awareness and miss the fact that, yeah, sure, you're working excessively and can't ever rest, but why? And they don't know why. And to do that one further step of going, okay, my identity is tied to my performance, so I can't afford the rest, because if I don't do, then I have no value. And if I have no value, what's the point of me being me? If you don't face that at some level, then how are you supposed to change your behavior? So I'm curious around, obviously you've come out the other side of some very significant health issues and creating pressure on your relationships, not just with your husband, but with your kids, probably with friends and family as well, let alone the relationship with yourself. You've come out the other side of that by making all kinds of adjustments to your nutrition and health and lifestyle. I'm really curious. I'm most curious around. Can you tell us a bit about the process of facing up to identity, like the deeper stuff around your value and worth that had been tied to performing and achieving, and the process of separating those so that you were able to have peace within yourself, which then could break the cycle of having to perform so chronically?
Yeah. And that came even several years after Dr. Kalish said, well, it's to do with your lifestyle. Because back then it was even like what you were talking about with layers. It's like, okay, yeah, cool. So I'm doing this body stuff and I'm like, okay, so I got to slow down. And so for a few years there, I tried to get more work-life balance and, more me time and go swim in the ocean and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't until a couple of years later that deeper stuff, I started thinking about that deeper stuff and working around that. And it more so came out of, so my husband, his role in our business is our motivational coach. And so he has a background as a mindset coach and neuro-linguistic programming practitioner. But prior to him getting into that line of work, he was a personal trainer. So it was more so, I guess, his own growth. So he had his own burnout story as well. That would be an interesting one to dig into, but it was really about like, I need to be the best and like high level performance sports person. I need to win and win and win. And it was completely breaking down his body. And so he had to do a lot of work around that to unravel that identity that actually my worth isn't in winning all the time. My worth is so much more, and where the heck did that even come from? And so he kind of, in his journey, I was resistant at first. And it's interesting too, like you always say, people are very kind of like a bit scared to dig into this stuff because it's going to show off some things and you're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so I remember he came back from a retreat actually where he'd done all this work and he came back glowing and he was like a new man. And he said to me, we need to change. He asked, he's like, can we get new dining chairs? I'll get to your question in a sec. It's just kind of an interesting lead up to my resistance to that initially. And I said, my dining chairs, these are great. I got them like they were $100 for 6 chairs on Gumtree, cute little antique chairs. But he said, I really don't like the chairs because they hurt my back. And I want to work through this so that I can be a better dad. And I'm like, this is really weird. And I got very offended. And I'm like, what's wrong with my chairs? If you love your family, you'll just sit in the chair and you'll have dinner with your family. I'm not getting rid of my chairs.
Wow.
And so that was the start of, which is why I'm really interested. And I really want to read your new book because it was like that, holy smokes, this guy is having his own transformation at a deeper level to what I had with my health. And I'm feeling like kind of insecure about that. And what does that mean with our relationship? And am I going to have to change? And like, or is he going to like go 10 steps ahead of me and I'm going to be left behind? And so that was just one example. There were many, many, many things that happened in that maybe 1 year period where it's just like Chris was transforming, but I wasn't. I'd transformed from like a lifestyle health perspective, but that inner work is just like, nah, I don't want to go there. But eventually I did. And I don't think that was any one specific time. It was more just conversations that we had during that time. And I think when I go back to, especially now running a business, which can be a bit scary when you don't have that regular income coming in every week like you do if you're employed by someone else and you know exactly what you're getting. And so after I had my children, so I feel like there were two deep things that were affecting my addicted doing tendencies. And that was that feeling of like worth when I achieved and I got praise. And then also like financial insecurity, I think, was a big one too. And I do remember working through that and thinking back to, okay, where did that come from? And was that coming from, I think it is, maybe not. Maybe if we actually had a session together, Jamie, would probably find something different. But I feel like it did come back from when I was an early teenager, the financial stresses in our own family, and then that like near bankruptcy, which really shook my whole world because it wasn't just like, oh, we need bankruptcy, but it completely changed like where we moved to, school, all that sort of stuff. So it was a huge, like everything that I knew was uprooted. And so for me, it's like, okay, do I need to, like, how do I change that? How do I get over that fear of not having enough, not being enough? The not being enough, I think, was an easier transition because I realized at the end of the day, does it really matter what other people think of me? And because I had such a personal health crisis, I guess, and it really affected my life, my work that I do now in our business, it's really like, I mean, yes, it's nice to win awards and to get media features, but really like the aim is so that more people can find out that there are ways, like especially mums, that there are ways that you can overcome body burnout and the root causes that all go along with that. And so it's not, so I feel like it's no longer about me needing to prove my worth that, yeah, I'm a good practitioner. Like everyone should work with me. It's more like, actually, I don't want other people to suffer like I did. Um, and so that helps me too with balance, because I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, and I create boundaries around this now as well, because I want to have different identities. Like I don't want to just be the businesswoman or the practitioner. I want to be a good mom. I want to be a loving wife. And I also want to be a human being in my own right. And so I've created boundaries around that, so that, when the kids are at school, that's where I put on my entrepreneur hat and, I go to town and do what I want to do. But when the kids come home, it's like I can take that hat off. And even if I don't get the stuff done, it doesn't matter, because time is irrelevant, really. Like there's no deadline to have to do things. I'm not letting anyone down. I'm not letting myself down. And I want to be the mum now. So that for me, and again, I don't know, maybe from an insecurity point of view, there are way deeper levels I could go through. But setting boundaries and becoming really clear about my different identities and when those identities show up has helped me to live a life where I don't have to feel like I have to prove my worth. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And if I was to examine one deeper level, all I'm most curious in is the belief structure that enables that behavior to be sustained. So when I hear someone say, I just stopped worrying about people, what they thought of me, I didn't need them to like me anymore. I mean, that's silly. Who cares what other people think? I can understand that that's the end result and the experience, but I'm curious how is that possible? Because it wasn't possible last year or for the whole life, and now all of a sudden it's possible. There's a missing piece. You're not telling me something. And so for a person who's been able to do that, on some level, they've actually created a belief that sustains that, a belief that they can hang that behavior on. Just like in the painful moments. So you kind of talked about the financial pain of watching your family suffer and your dad's business nearly go bankrupt. It's, yes, there's an experience of hardship there and difficulty and stress, and it's linked to finances. But in order for you, an intelligent, creative, successful woman, not to spend money on travel and to have this obsession with, hoarding money so that you had enough, how do you do that? What belief enables you to behave like that? Like that's how I'm wired to think. And so I'd be really, really curious around the personalization of the experience at 15. That's where I'd go. I'd wonder, sure, when that happened, you were watching yourself have that experience and you're in the midst of it. And it wasn't just happening to your dad. It wasn't just happening to your family. It was happening to you. And it was data that was informing you about something really important. And so that to me is where these beliefs are formed off the sense-making questions. Why is this happening? And what does it mean about me? And so that's the level that I think about. And just to touch on your point around the insecurity piece.
I'm just thinking back to the financial thing too. As a teenager, I did this with Easter eggs as well. It was really weird. So I get my Easter eggs and all my other siblings would eat them all, and I'd be like, little piece, and hide it under my bed, and like a little piece every day, and 6 months later I'd still have my Easter eggs. But and then same with money. It was like, okay, yeah. I'm working, I'm getting money, put it in the bank. And I got praised for that as well, both with the Easter eggs and the money. And so I don't know, maybe it was a praise thing again. It's like, oh, Filipa is like our angel child. She's so good at saving her money. And look at all this money that she has in her bank account. Oh, look at her sister. She's just spent it all on clothes. Same with the Easter eggs. It's like, oh, Filipa's got such good self-control around sugar and chocolate. And look, she's saving her Easter egg. And sometimes I'd actually give my Easter eggs back to my mum at her birthday 6 months later. So that's I've always thought about that. I'm like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. Is it something like, am I scared of not having? And even when I started changing the way that I ate, that was a whole journey in itself, because it wasn't like I decided one day of, oh, I'm going to go from eating like packaged processed food to eating all beautiful whole foods from scratch. It was like a 5-year journey for me to get from the point of being addicted to sugar, basically, to having like a really good relationship with food and eating food because I know, because one, I enjoy it, but also my body loves it.
Mm.
And initially there were things where I'm like, okay, I'm going to buy that block of chocolate and I'm going to hide it away from my husband. And or I'd go to a social function. This is really really dysfunctional, but I'd hide. So I'd take stuff off the table, put it on a plate, I'd go and put it in the car and eat it later. Like weird stuff like that. And I don't know, it almost comes back to like a sense of scarcity, lacking, embarrassment as well. I don't know if all that ties back into the financial stuff, but they're just patterns that I've noticed that I'm like, ooh, that was weird.
It's I'm grateful that you're sharing, because the whole purpose of this podcast, firstly, the 10-minute Tuesday, is to give people really practical, short, sharp, intelligent thinking around how to actually work this stuff in your life, and then to have conversations with people who've gone on to do some really cool things and continuing to do cool things in the world and have overcome some stuff, and that the proof that it's possible to change. And so I'm grateful that you're letting us deconstruct that a little and even examine some of the ways that you've done that, because I think that's so central to everything I do in the Insecurity Project. It's not just to convince people it's possible, but to show them how. How is it possible? How can you also face your fears? So that the piece of personalization is a bit of technology that I think is easy to miss. I don't know if you've heard me talk about misdirection in any of the podcasts, but that to me is the great magic of people cursing themselves. They think the action's happening over here, i.e. what's happening to them, but they're missing where the action's really taking place, all in their sense-making structures in their head and their heart, going, yeah, but why is this happening? And what does it mean about me? And it's off the back of those subtle and often hidden answers that their whole life has changed, not because of what happened. And so when they go looking for the review and how to improve this, often they get caught in the, well, this is what happened, and so that must be what I need to fix. But it happened, so you can't really change it. You can't change the fact that your dad's business nearly got bankrupt, but you can change the personalization. And that's obviously what you've done, whether you're aware of it or not. You've created different personalization. Your ability to not care about what others think is obviously off the back of personalization. I am a good person whether you like me or not. So the belief that I'm okay and I'm valuable, not tied to your opinion of me, obviously then frees you to have common sense and to be logical, which is such an interesting thing. Also hearing your story, and I'm sure people can relate to so many parts of it, because there are elements of madness in the dysfunction. It's like, here's you, an intelligent, creative, kind, good person, behaving in a way that's destroying your body and undermining your relationships, and doing things that you're like, wow, this is really, really weird. It's a journey toward madness. And so you can't actually think rationally about your own experience because of these deep drivers that are often unnoticed. So to bring to the surface, create change, then means you can just go back to functioning in a relaxed and peaceful way and be rational about your life again and behave in a way that's congruent with what makes sense and what is good for you and good for others.
Yeah, I think that I have thought a lot about that transition from being to like, I want to eat this way and I'm eating this way, but I'm also not eating this way in secret, to actually I can go now to a function and not be tempted by it, like not even desire the food that I once desired because I know that it makes me feel crappy. But there was so much tied into that as well. And it was like, what do people think of me? And so that hiding and the hoarding, especially like, because I was a health practitioner, that's when I kind of started my journey into natural therapies too. And I'm like, oh, if people see me eating this thing, then I'm not going to be like very, I'm a hypocrite, or I'm not walking the talk is that the right? Talking the walk, walking the talk.
Walking the talk, yeah.
They're
Living
not
out
going to
what you
think
say.
I'm a very good nutritionist if
Mm.
they see me eating this sugar. And so there was so much like shame and guilt around that too. And maybe even like the financial stuff too. It's like, oh, entrepreneurs make lots of money, don't they? And well, not all or many. But, and so even that, it's like taking the way that people see, or even myself sees a nutritionist, to reconciling with that to a point where I want to live my life the way that I want to live my life, because it brings joy to me, to my life. And also, like, I'm very much like body, because that's my profession. And it's like I'm honoring my body. I'm honoring my body and my mental health by living this way for no other reason, but because I have this deep desire to do it. Even, I don't know, this is probably a conscientious topic, and I'm happy to tell people if they ask me, but I'm not vaccinated. I'm not vaccinated, COVID vaccine, but it was a huge decision for me to make, because on one side it was like, okay, I have all these people, like close people that I love around me that, have people who are vulnerable to COVID, and you're feeling a lot of guilt and shame around not getting vaccinated. But then on the other hand, I'm like, but I'm a health practitioner and I'm a natural practitioner, and like, should I put something into my body that's may potentially like damage it or cause a dysfunction? And so there was so my struggle within myself was very much around what other people were thinking. And then at the end of the day, and like, to be honest, I actually booked in to get the COVID vaccination twice, but I just couldn't do it. And I couldn't do it because internally for myself, I didn't feel like it was the best thing for me to do at that time, for me and for no one else. And so I think, I don't know. And again, I guess, like, how did I get to that point? That's the outcome. But I feel like my health journey has helped me to make the decisions that I make and to live my life the way that I live it now, so that I can honor my health and my body and my sanity. And it doesn't really matter what other people think about that.
It's beautiful. What could be more important than a deep, loving relationship with yourself, deep rapport, and the ability to know when that rapport is about to be broken, and to realize that there's nothing as important as that rapport with yourself. So,
and even looking back as a kid too, I feel like I didn't have that. I don't know, maybe most children don't, and that's why a lot of these patterns happen right back from childhood, because we don't know how to deal with or who we are. But there was a lot of insecurity as a kid and a teenager and in my 20s, that I didn't know who I was or what I wanted or what I valued.
Oh, of course. I think that's the problem. Most people are at war with themselves and are fighting against themselves to try and win. They've created opinions that there's something no good or wrong or bad, and they need to override that or squash that or diminish that or kill that part of themselves. It's a brutal relationship with self. So to have found peace, to be operating with permission now. I don't know if you've heard me distinguish the difference between self-permission and self-discipline, but that's kind of exactly what you're describing, fighting against yourself now to this beautiful work with myself. And I don't have permission from my own body to take this vaccine. So how could I do that? How could I betray myself? How could I dishonor who I am? That's not going to work.
Yeah, I love that. Self-discipline, self-permission, because self-discipline is like, I have the control, or I don't have enough self-control, or I have good self-control to do this thing. But the self-permission is, I'm doing it because I love myself.
Yeah, and self-discipline is a young person strategy because it's inefficient. It requires you to have energy to waste. It's all about, even what your husband was describing, just the forcing, the fighting, the desperation to win at all costs. You have to use discipline to do that. But eventually you steal all the future energy and you've got none left, and you've created such deep pain within yourself that it all comes to a head, and your unconscious, I think often your unconscious deliberately sabotages this process and goes, right, that's it. We're not friends and I'm not part of this anymore. So chronic illness, lack of energy, significant problems where you are incapacitated and can't actually forge on in this crazy journey. And you have to either, some people don't actually come out the other side. Some people don't find a way to find peace again. And that's kind of the beauty of hearing your story and the point of this podcast. But at some point, if you can actually stop and listen and understand who you are and what you've been trying to do and find ways to bring peace, then there is a new way of living, and it's a way that's congruent and with deep rapport, and it's healthy and it's vibrant and it's attractive. And that's
Can I just
what's
add
possible.
something? Oh, sorry. Can I just add
No, you
something
go for
too
your
when you
life.
said like find that peace? I remember doing again it was a conversation with my husband Chris, really, and then it turned into a coaching session. But he's like, "Well, why do you want to have good health?" And it all came back to, and again, maybe there's even deeper levels, but what I kind of work back to is that I want calm because I dislike chaos, which is how I felt when my health issues were an issue, and maybe even how I felt when financial stuff was happening. It's like chaos. It's like, oh, what's going to happen? Like the fear of the unknown. Same with health issues. To finding that calm, like inner calm and peace, is really important to me.
What stuff do you do on a daily basis or weekly basis? What are the rituals that are useful for your mental health and maintaining this rapport with yourself? Are there certain things that you found really useful?
Yeah, I think like boundaries for me, like setting clear boundaries, and they change as well depending on the season of my life and what I'm doing during that season. But creating the boundaries and what I mentioned too about just being clear about like how I'm going to show up that day. Because just like an alcoholic, a recovering addicted doer in my experience, I can very easily start unraveling all the stuff that I've done to go back into that tendency again. And so, and again, maybe that means that there's work to be done. But I feel like every day, every morning when I wake up, it's like, how am I going to show up today? And just realigning with my highest values and setting up those boundaries for myself. And even like, even from a very practical way of time scheduling and time blocking, that this is the person that I show up to now. And then so that then they're not bleeding into each other, which like I can very easily switch back into that got to work to the expense of like giving attention to my kids or to my husband or, you know, even starting to like cause health issues type stuff. So I feel like there's still work to be done. I don't know, like, does that ever get better? Or is it a conscious decision that you make daily to live your life how you want to?
Well, I believe it must get better. And similarly to the vaccine issue, so you find yourself booking in twice and then your own body says, no, I can't. And that's, if you go ahead, then you violate something deep around this relationship we have. So I think about the idea of managing myself as similar to that. So if there's ever a situation where I had this default thinking, oh no, I need to manage myself and create rules for myself so I don't behave badly, I get my ass kicked by my own unconscious. It's like, don't treat me like a child. Don't treat me like I'm a bad person. Don't treat me like you're going to manage me. If you feel like you're going to manage me, you haven't understood something. Yeah. So I find that there is genuine change and lasting transformation and an upgrade in your relationship with yourself when you really make peace and understand all parts of yourself, so that you realize that everything, all the resistance you had in the past was actually loving and had a positive intention to keep you safe and meet your needs and protect fears. It wasn't because you were bad. It wasn't because there was something wrong with you. So even when you behave badly, it didn't mean there's something that needs to be hidden or suppressed or killed. It was just you were trying to get by. You were trying to bring peace and comfort to yourself. So long answer to your question, but I think there must be a possible to not have to manage yourself, to have a deep trusting relationship where you go, and you described it with the food. Like you go into that situation, you're not like, this is not even a temptation. I'm not even like I'm a recovering food stealer, hider. It's like, I just don't need to do that because it doesn't make any sense anymore. I don't really care that what you think about me. I know what I think about me. So I'm fine here. So I think there's opportunity to review the managing process.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I think that you just answered my question, because it's facets of life too. So I feel like I've done that with food.
Mm.
So the addicted worker, still a little work to be done, but yeah, putting maybe I'm still in the managing section of that then too.
Well, and I mean, to frame this for the audience, when we're setting up this conversation, you said, look, please push back on anything. Coach me if you need to, which like, it's
Yeah.
a bold thing to say. And you give people a real gift, but just because I'm so big on permission for these questions in all of my coaching sessions and whenever I talk, just to inform the audience, there was some permission to have these conversations before we press record. But I would never use recovering addictive, what was the language that you use?
Recovering addicted doer.
Yeah, sure. So language is powerful, as your husband's, I'm sure he bangs on about all the time with his NLP training. So I'm curious around, okay, so the addiction in the first place, what for? The attempt to meet needs and protect fears through that behavior. So it was just a strategy. It wasn't a strategy to do something. So if you can understand what it was about and find a better strategy, then you displace that and you don't need to manage it. So to me,
and you're recovered,
you are recovered because
evolved.
You are evolved. And so, yeah, that language then is language of management, and it's unkind language because it misunderstands what you were trying to do in the first place. I think that's the real problem with that language. It's unkind. And if someone was unkind to you, you'd resent them. You're like, you don't get me. You're judging me. I don't know if you've ever been managed by someone in a work setting, but it's always unkind. You're like, you think I'm bad. You haven't understood why I did that in the first place. You've got your wires crossed. Now you think I'm dangerous and you got to manage me. That's bullshit. Like, don't treat me like that.
Or inadequate. You can't do that thing.
Exactly. So to treat ourselves in that same way, I think it's exactly the same. It's unkind, and unconsciously there's resentment that builds. It's like, man, you don't even know me. You don't trust me. I don't feel the love. So to do the work around examining what for in the first place and reconcile that and work together with yourself to find strategies that meet the needs more resourcefully in ways that are more adult and more aligned to your values, displacement is what happens. You upgrade and evolve.
Thank you for the gift. I will change my language.
Well, thank you for the gift of your vulnerability and your willingness to have this conversation out loud and in front of an audience. That's extraordinary because, I think so many people have versions of this hidden somewhere, and to raise awareness and bring it to the surface will give people ways of thinking about their own experiences and where they manage themselves in a way that's unkind.
I feel like it's very part of how we practice as well, in that nobody's perfect. We're not perfect. There's still stuff we're working through. And sometimes, and of course, you want to work with someone who's the authority and the expert, but not in a way that it's like, well, I'm perfect, and that means that you have to be perfect. It's a journey together, really.
It is a journey. I'm the same, like being a coach. Have I got to be perfect? Have I got to have everything sorted before I can help someone else? So the way that I've thought about that is I don't have to be perfect, but I must be wholehearted. I must be smoking what I'm selling. I must be embodying everything that I'm talking about, and it must be the overflow of my own experience. And then when I think about insecurity, I think my conviction around solving that problem is it must be possible to solve it on your current level of growth. So to show up completely free from the imposter syndrome, completely free from the need to prove yourself or defend yourself here, right now, in this experience. But if you do that, then you'll be so free that you'll inevitably take new territory and push new frontiers and evolve, and you'll face new uncertainty because you've never done that before. And so new insecurities will arise. So I think it's not that you ever fully you never deal with insecurity again, but it must be possible to be free from it here and then face it again in the next growth and deal with it there, and then face it again, and then face it again, and face it again. And so I think that's a really important way of thinking about it, so that you're able to to show up in a way that says this is a solvable problem, and you can watch as to see the evidence of that.
Yeah. Just one other little thing, just something too that I guess is entrenched in what we do in our health practice as well is body and mind is connected. And so I really feel like if my body is out of whack, it absolutely can cause these insecure feelings and thoughts to pop up. Or, you know, and whether that shows up as like being irritated and frustrated at my husband, which is really a reflection of my own frustration, or with my children. So again, like just honoring my body, nourishing my body with good food, sleep, like just all those practical stuff makes a huge difference to the way that I think and feel about myself. And again, maybe that's more surface level, but it helps me to maintain the work that I've done.
I think it's not surface because, as you said, mind and body are one system, and to lead with one or the other, I think is a really clever thing to do, to move your body, to change your nutrition, to address how you are feeling, then also impacts how you're thinking and your emotions, and or vice versa. If you deal with your thinking, then it shows up in your body as well. It lightens you, it creates physical changes. So at different times, you got to lead different ways.
Yeah. And then also I know when things are out of balance because my body, like I'm very in tune with the messages my body sends to me too. So it's like, oh, why is my back a bit sore today? Or, oh, why am I feeling a bit like heartburny? Like what's going on there? And so they're good strategies as well that I use daily, or sometimes not daily, weekly at least. Some of these things are popping up that I'm like, okay, let's analyze what's going on inside my life.
Right.
Where's that imbalance happening? And like not just in my body, because there's weak spots in my body that will show up with messages when stuff inside my life is not balanced.
So you've almost developed a communication language with yourself through physical
Yeah.
pain or signals, or
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
great. One more question. Can you tell us about your relationship with your kids now? So you mentioned that giving birth was traumatic, difficult, and that there wasn't a natural love there. Can you tell us what things are like now as a mum?
Yeah. Awesome. So different relationships with both children. Poppy, like Chris, my husband, was kind of the mother father role for the first at least 6 months. And so they always had a really special bond. And I think age and maybe as I felt more balanced and healthier, maybe it was like Poppy was 5 years old and just something clicked where we have a bond now. And I don't know when it was or what it was, but that bond that wasn't there came 5 years later, which is sad but also happy. Elsie, my youngest one, a different type of birth. That love was there first, although I then started having more health issues, especially anxiety. So back then, yeah, again, this is not a nice word, but I called myself the dragon mum back then because I was screaming and snapping at the kids all the time, dysfunctionally, like a newborn baby. That you shouldn't get that angry with a child, really. And that was a big pinnacle point too, where I'm like, okay, I got to change the way that I've got to change who I am and my body and my mind, because I love my children. Like I love my children and I don't want them to, I don't want to damage them. And so I've always been really conscious around that, like working on myself first and foremost for myself, but also so I can be a more loving and present mum, and also be a better role model for them too. And again, it's what I talked about with the hat now. And some days that hat doesn't get put on the way that I would like to, but intentionally spending time with them. We love playing Uno together, especially my youngest, 6 years old. She beats me every time. It's awesome. I try my hardest, but spending one of my highest values is my family. And so prioritizing time with them is so important to me, important to them, but it also helps me like to live my true worth And so carving out that time. Again, not a perfect mum. Probably ask my kids right now and they'll be like, she's not a good mum. No, actually they do say nice things about me now. But yeah, the whole journey has made motherhood so much better, and also our marriage and relationship, because there was a point where it could have gone bust. But working on that daily, like again, it's waking up and being intentional. How am I going to show up as a mum and a wife today?
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you are an award-winning practitioner. You get some really interesting media coverage. I've been watching some stuff that's been written about you, hearing some things you've said. You're great at what you do, and you do amazing work in the world. So where can people find out more about your work, and where do you hang out online?
Yeah, cool. So we've got our website, chrisandphilly.fm. On there too, we've got a whole bunch of free resources. We have a scorecard, which a lot of people love doing. So that's called the Ending Body Burnout Assessment. And it looks at your rate of burnout symptoms, but also body, mind, and environment, and where some of those root causes might be coming from. So it gives you a rating. We've also got mini courses around burnout, hormonal, gut issues, and mostly hanging out on Facebook and Instagram.
Right. And that's Philly with an F for those who are trying to spell that.
Yes.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for a beautiful conversation, for being so secure in sharing your journey and reflecting on how you've done what you've done. You've given the listeners a great gift. I'm sure people will benefit from this. So any parting words before we wrap up?
No, thank you. Thank you for the gift that you're giving to everybody as well. I don't think there's enough people talking about these deeper, darker issues. And so, again, super grateful that I could be on your show today, and hope that everyone got something out of it.
Thanks, Phil. We'll leave it there.